The late afternoon sun poured across the Montana mountains like a sheet of molten gold, sliding over peaks and pine trees until it reached the Hemingway Ranch. Jess Hemingway stood at the edge of the pasture, one hand resting on her hip, the other shading her eyes. The air smelled of dry grass, sun-warmed earth, and a hint of rain yet to fall. To the east of her property stood the old shed, a leaning, rust-eaten structure that had been there since before her grandfather's time. It looked more like a relic than a building. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The roof sagged in the middle, half the boards had rotted through, and vines climbed up its side like veins of neglect. It wasn't even technically hers. At least, not until this morning. "Guess it's official now," she murmured, unfolding the creased paper in her hand. $1 whole. The deed had been signed by her neighbor, old Thomas Kettering, whose family used to own the adjoining land. He'd come by earlier in his beat-up Ford, handed her the papers and said, "It's worthless to me, Jess. Might as well make it yours. $1 and it's done." Jess had laughed at the absurdity of it. $1 for a pile of splinters. Still, something about that shed called to her, something quiet, hidden, maybe even sad. Now, with her golden retriever Ranger trotting at her side, Jess approached the dilapidated structure. Each step stirred dust and dry grass, and Ranger's tail wagged like he was heading toward a grand discovery. "Stay close, boy," she said, her boots crunching over the brittle earth. "Don't want that thing collapsing on us." The closer she got, the stranger the air felt, cooler somehow, as if the shed itself held a pocket of shade against the warmth of day. She ran her hand along the rough wood. The boards were worn smooth in places, charred black in others. It looked as though it had once caught fire, maybe decades ago. A faint metallic smell lingered, like rust and old coins. Ranger sniffed at the door, ears pricking up. Then suddenly he barked, a deep, sharp sound that echoed across the empty field. "What is it, bud?" Jess crouched, squinting through a crack in the doorframe. Nothing but darkness met her eyes. Ranger pawed the ground impatiently, nose pressed to the gap. He barked again, more urgently this time. All right, Jess said, reaching for the old iron latch. It resisted, then gave way with a groan. The door swung open, scraping the dirt. Inside, beams of sunlight pierced the dim interior, revealing dust motes swirling like tiny ghosts. The smell of damp wood and oil hit her nose. Her boots sank into a thin layer of straw and dirt. "Looks like a family of raccoons used to live here," she muttered. "Or maybe the ghosts of old tools." Ranger whined and padded forward. His nose pressed to the floor, tracing some invisible trail until he reached the far corner. He began to dig, not wildly but with purpose. Jess frowned. "Ranger, what are you after?" Then she saw it. The floorboards there were different, newer than the rest, nailed down with clean silver heads instead of rusted ones. Someone had replaced them not long ago. Her curiosity flared. She knelt and pried at the edge with her pocket knife. The first board lifted easily, exposing a dark hollow underneath. "Okay, that's strange," Ranger barked again, tail wagging furiously. Jess reached inside, her fingers brushing against something cold and metallic. She pulled it out slowly, blinking in disbelief. It was a small iron box, heavy and covered in dust. The lid had a carved emblem, a horse rearing up beneath a mountain peak. She didn't recognize it. It didn't look like anything her grandfather owned. She sat back on her heels. "What the hell is this doing here?" The box rattled faintly when she shook it, as though something inside shifted against metal. It wasn't locked, just sealed by a rusted clasp. She hesitated. Then with a deep breath she flicked it open. Inside was a bundle of old photographs, a folded leather-bound journal, and of all things, a silver locket on a tarnished chain. Jess's throat tightened as she stared down at the photos. The first one showed her grandfather, Henry Hemingway, standing beside a man she didn't recognize in front of this very shed. Only back then it had been whole. Painted red, the mountains bright behind it. "What?" she whispered, flipping through more. Her grandfather again, with different people, miners perhaps, or ranch hands. And then one photo stopped her cold. It was her mother, Clara Hemingway, as a young woman, barely 20, standing by that same shed, holding a small child. Jess's breath caught. The child had the same pale eyes she saw in the mirror every day. She hadn't even known her mother had been here before Jess was born. Her mum had died when Jess was only 6, taking most of her secrets with her. Jess turned to the leather journal, her hands trembling slightly as she opened the first page. If someone finds this, know that what we buried here was never meant to stay hidden forever. The truth about the Hemingway claim must be told. She froze. The ink was faded, but the name at the bottom was unmistakable. Clara Hemingway. Ranger barked once more, the sound echoing off the shed walls as if in approval. His nose nudging the box. Jess looked from the journal to the photographs, then to the dog who'd found them. Her heart raced. "This isn't just a shed, is it, boy?" she whispered. "It's something else. Something she left for me." She stepped outside, the cool mountain air brushing her face as she looked back toward her ranch house, her mind spinning. Her mother had left her a message, a mystery buried beneath rot and rust, and it had waited patiently, silently, for her to buy the shed for $1 single. The following morning dawned gray and misty over the Hemingway ranch. The mountains loomed like sleeping giants, wrapped in low clouds. Jess sat at her kitchen table, a steaming mug of coffee untouched beside her. The leather-bound journal spread open in front of her. Ranger lay at her feet, chin resting on his paws, eyes following her every move. The pages of the journal were yellowed and fragile, written in her mother's looping cursive. The ink had faded, but the emotion behind each word still pulsed like a heartbeat through time. Jess ran her fingers over the first entry. April 12th, 1987. If you're reading this, my sweet girl, it means you found the box. There's more buried on this land than anyone knows. Not gold, not treasure, but truth. The Hemingway claim was never about cattle or crops. It was about what your grandfather discovered beneath this ranch and tried to hide from the world. Jess's heart thudded in her chest. Beneath the ranch. She flipped the page. The shed isn't what it seems. It was built to cover the entrance. They said it had to be sealed, but I couldn't forget. Not after what I saw. The words ended abruptly, the next page smeared as though water or tears had blurred the ink. Jess leaned back, stunned. Her mother, Clara, had always been quiet about the ranch's past. She'd never spoken about her father's mining days or what happened before she left for California. Now all those silences were starting to make sense. She turned to the next legible page. Henry thought he could protect the family by hiding it. He said the mountain takes as much as it gives. He was right. But one day, someone will have to face what we buried. Jess's throat tightened. "What did you bury, Mom?" she whispered. Ranger's ears perked up at her voice. He gave a low whine and nudged her leg, tail sweeping the floor. Jess smiled faintly. "Guess we're in this together, huh, buddy?" She closed the journal and glanced out the kitchen window. The shed stood like a sentinel across the pasture, half shrouded in morning fog. Every instinct in her body screamed that something waited there, something that had been hidden for decades. She grabbed her coat, flashlight, and gloves. The door creaked when she opened it again, as though protesting her return. Ranger slipped inside first, nose to the ground, tail wagging slowly. Jess knelt by the loose boards in the corner, the ones covering the hollow where she'd found the box. But this time, she noticed something else. Faint marks burned into the wood. They formed a pattern, like a series of small triangles arranged in a circle. "What is that?" she murmured. Ranger pawed at the dirt beside the boards. His nails clicked against something hard. Jess grabbed a small trowel and began to dig. Within moments, she uncovered a metal ring embedded in the ground. Her pulse quickened. She tugged at it, and the floor gave way with a groan, revealing a hidden trapdoor beneath the shed. "Oh my God," she breathed, heart hammering. Ranger barked once, his golden tail sweeping the air like a flag. Jess shone her flashlight down the dark opening. A wooden ladder descended into the earth, disappearing into shadows. Cold air drifted up, damp, mineral-rich, like the breath of the mountain itself. For a long moment she hesitated. She was alone. The closest neighbor lived 5 miles away, and the cell service here was practically non-existent. But curiosity outweighed fear. This was her land, her mother's secret, and now her turn to uncover the truth. "Stay close, Ranger," she said, and started down the ladder. The air grew cooler the deeper she went. Dust and cobwebs clung to the wooden walls, and the rungs creaked under her weight. When she finally reached the bottom, her boots landed on packed earth. She swung her flashlight around. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing a tunnel, its walls lined with old timber beams, the kind used in mining shafts. Jess froze. Her grandfather, Henry Hemingway, had been a miner before he turned rancher. But she'd always thought his claim, the so-called Hemingway mine, was up in the North Ridge, not here beneath the ranch itself. She took a cautious step forward. The tunnel stretched into blackness, the air thick with age. Old tools lay scattered along the ground, rusted picks, broken lanterns, and a dented tin pail. Then her light caught something carved into the tunnel wall, a message scratched in rough letters, "Do not go beyond the second marker." Jess frowned. "Second marker?" Ranger gave a soft growl, his fur bristling slightly. "Easy, boy," she whispered, crouching to pet him. "We'll just look a little further." Then we go back. They moved slowly, their footsteps echoing. The silence was heavy, ancient. Jess's flashlight beam caught movement. Dust, or maybe a flicker of something more. Then they reached the first marker, a wooden post with a red X painted on it. Faded nearly to pink, a faint vibration hummed underfoot. Jess stopped. The air smelled faintly metallic, like ozone after lightning. Ranger whined. "Okay," she said softly. "Maybe we've seen enough for one day." But as she turned to climb back up, her beam swept across something half buried in the dirt, a small metal canister, its side engraved with the same horse and mountain emblem as the box upstairs. Jess knelt and brushed the dirt away. The canister was heavy, sealed with wax and a rusted clasp. When she shook it gently, something inside shifted, a metallic clink. She glanced at Ranger. "What do you think, partner? Keep digging?" Ranger barked once, decisively. Jess smiled nervously. "All right, then. You win." She pried the clasp open. Inside was a tightly rolled bundle of blueprints and a folded parchment that smelled faintly of oil and age. Under her flashlight, she unrolled it carefully. The parchment wasn't a map of the ranch. It was a survey of a mineral vein, a network of tunnels stretching beneath Hemingway Ranch and the surrounding properties. At the bottom, written in her grandfather's unmistakable hand, were the words, "The vein runs deep, deeper than we ever should have gone. Seal the entrance. Tell no one." Her breath hitched. Before she could process the meaning, a soft sound echoed from deeper in the tunnel. A metallic clang, distant but distinct. Ranger's head snapped up. He growled low in his throat. Jess turned off her flashlight, plunging them into darkness. Her heart pounded. The air trembled again, as if something massive shifted beneath the earth. Then, from the shadows ahead, came a whisper of air like a sigh, and a faint glimmer of light flickering from somewhere far down the tunnel. She gripped the flashlight tighter. A voice barely above a whisper. "What the hell is down here, Mom?" Ranger pressed close to her leg, trembling but alert. The tunnel was silent again, except for the sound of her pulse in her ears. But Jess knew 2 things for certain now. Her family had been hiding something beneath the ranch, and she had just taken the first step toward uncovering it. Whatever it wasn't done with her yet. The storm rolled in from the north that afternoon, turning the Montana sky an iron gray. Wind swept across the Hemingway Ranch, rattling fence lines and bending the tall grass like waves in a restless sea. Jess Hemingway stood on the back porch, arms folded tight, watching the rain blur the distant outline of the mountains. Her mind wasn't on the weather. It was trapped beneath the earth, in that dark tunnel beneath the ruined shed. The journal, the photographs, the old map, the warning carved into the wall, all of it ran through her head like a loop she couldn't escape. Do not go beyond the second marker. She should have listened, maybe. But curiosity was stronger than fear now, and something about her mother's words in the journal, the truth about the Hemingway claim must be told, felt like an invitation. Ranger barked softly beside her, sensing her unease. Jess ruffled his ears. "You ready to go back down, boy?" He wagged his tail as if he'd been waiting for her to ask. By late afternoon, the rain had eased to a drizzle. The smell of wet earth and pine filled the air as Jess trudged across the muddy pasture toward the shed. The wooden structure looked even older in the grey light, its edges softened by mist. She carried a lantern this time, along with a small backpack, water, rope, flashlight, and a notebook. Her grandfather had raised her to respect the land, but also to investigate what didn't make sense. "Every piece of land tells a story," he used to say. "It's your job to listen." She took a deep breath and descended the ladder again, Ranger right behind her. At the bottom, the air was still cool and dry despite the rain above. The lantern's glow cast a warm circle of light, pushing back the darkness just far enough for her to see the tunnel stretch ahead. Jess moved slowly, her boots crunching over gravel and dirt. The sound of dripping water echoed faintly in the distance. They reached the first marker easily. The red X glimmered dully under the lantern's light. The ground trembled faintly beneath her feet again, a deep, slow pulse, like the mountain was breathing. "Second marker," Jess whispered, tightening her grip on the lantern. "That's where we stop, right?" Ranger looked up at her, eyes bright. "But he didn't stop walking," Jess sighed. "You're as bad as I am." A few yards further, the tunnel began to widen. The walls here were lined not just with timber, but with reinforced steel plates, rusted and cracked. Strange symbols, triangles, circles, intersecting lines, had been etched into the metal. When her lantern light hit the next post, her breath caught. The second marker, this one wasn't painted. It was burned into the wood, black and deep as if by fire. Beneath it, someone had scrawled words in chalk, "Turn back." "The mountain keeps what it's owed." Jess swallowed hard. "That's not ominous at all." Ranger barked once and started pawing at a section of the tunnel wall beside the marker. His claws scraped away a thin layer of dirt, revealing a seam, an outline shaped like a door. Jess set the lantern on the ground and pressed her palm against the wall. Cold, smooth, definitely metal. She traced the seam with her fingers until she found a latch. Half hidden by debris, telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Okay, what are you hiding behind here?" she muttered, tugging gently. The latch didn't budge. She tried again, harder this time, and the mechanism released with a groan of protest. The metal panel swung open an inch, then another, releasing a breath of air so cold it raised goosebumps on her arms. Beyond the door was darkness, and the faint, rhythmic sound of dripping water. She hesitated only a moment, then stepped through. The chamber beyond was massive, far larger than she expected. Her lantern's glow barely touched the far wall. The ceiling arched high overhead, lined with old wooden beams and thick cables that disappeared into the rock. It looked like an old mining hub, abandoned decades ago. Rusted carts sat on broken tracks, tools lay scattered, and collapsed beams formed jagged shapes in the gloom. Jess's breath echoed softly. "Grandpa, what were you doing down here?" Ranger trotted ahead, nose to the ground. Then he froze, ears forward, tail stiff, and growled low in his throat. Jess lifted the lantern higher. The light revealed something in the far corner, a collapsed tunnel entrance, half buried under rock and timber, and at its base, barely visible, was a small wooden crate. She hurried over, her pulse pounding. The crate was sealed but brittle with age. The letters HH were stenciled across the lid in black paint. She pried it open with a piece of metal rebar. Inside were old documents, oilcloth wrapped and tied with twine. She pulled one free, wiping away grime until she could read the label. Hemingway Mining Co. Vein 17 Sample Log. 1959. There were dozens of them, handwritten records, geological notes, even correspondence on company letterhead. But beneath the papers was something else, a small glass vial, half filled with a metallic silvery liquid that shimmered even in the weak lantern light. Jess frowned. "Mercury?" she murmured. Then she noticed the writing etched into the crate's side. "Caution. Contaminated material." Her heart sank. Oh no, this wasn't just a mine. It was a sealed-off toxic site. Her grandfather hadn't been protecting gold. He'd been covering up something dangerous, something that could poison the land itself. She turned to Ranger. That's what he meant. The mountain takes what it's owed. Before she could lift the vial for a closer look, a noise froze her blood. Footsteps. Not echoes, not her imagination. Footsteps, slow, heavy, coming from deeper within the chamber. Ranger's fur bristled. He growled, teeth bared, eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the fallen beams. Jess quickly dimmed the lantern, her heart hammering. "Hello?" she called out, her voice trembling despite herself. "Is someone there?" No answer, only silence and the faint scrape of stone against stone. Then, from the shadows, a soft light appeared. It was bluish-white, flickering like fireflies, dancing in mid-air near the collapsed tunnel. Jess's breath hitched. "What the hell?" Ranger whimpered, backing up a step. The light drifted closer, illuminating part of the tunnel wall, where suddenly Jess saw handprints pressed into the stone. Dozens of them, dark and smeared, like echoes of those who'd been trapped there long ago. Jess stumbled backward, clutching the lantern to her chest. No, 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 this isn't possible. The light brightened for a split second, revealing a name scratched into the wall, written in the same handwriting she'd seen in the journal upstairs. Clara Hemingway. Her mother's name. Her knees nearly gave out. The air turned freezing cold, her breath visible in the beam of the lantern. And somewhere deep in the earth, something rumbled, low and alive. Ranger barked wildly, snapping Jess back to herself. She grabbed the crate, stuffed a few documents inside her pack, and stumbled toward the tunnel. "Come on, Ranger. We're done for today." Behind her, as she fled, the light began to fade, but not before she heard something faint, like a woman's whisper following her out of the dark. "Find the rest, Jess." Before they do. By the time she climbed out of the shed, the storm had passed. The world above was quiet again, the clouds breaking apart to reveal streaks of amber sunset. Jess collapsed onto the damp grass, shaking, the journal clutched to her chest. Ranger pressed close, whining softly. She looked back toward the shed, its open door yawning like a mouth into the earth. Her family's secret wasn't just about treasure. It was about something buried, something dangerous, and someone who still wanted it kept hidden, and for the first time, Jess realized she might not be the only one searching. The next morning dawned with a brittle stillness that felt almost unnatural. The rain had washed the land clean, leaving the air crisp and bright. But to Jess Hemingway, everything looked different, off somehow. The shed loomed in the distance like a bruise on the earth, the memory of that whisper echoing through her skull. "Find the rest, Jess." Before they do, she hadn't slept much. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that flickering blue light, the handprints, her mother's name carved into stone. Ranger had lain beside her all night, his warm body pressed close, ears twitching at every creak of the old ranch house. Now, as she poured herself a cup of coffee, her eyes drifted toward the kitchen table. The items from the chamber were spread out before her, the folded map, the journal, and the documents from the crate. The silvery vial lay wrapped in a cloth, sealed tight. Her fingers brushed the paper labeled Hemingway Mining Co. Vein 17 log. 1959, the entries were written in two distinct handwritings. One belonged to her grandfather. The other, sharper, slanted, was signed by someone named Earl Maddox. The name stirred something faint in her memory. Her grandfather used to mention an Earl when she was little, his old mining partner. "Smart man, dangerous heart," he'd said once. "Knows how to dig but not how to stop," Jess frowned. If Grandpa sealed that mine, maybe Earl didn't want it sealed. Ranger barked softly, as if in agreement. She grabbed her keys, the journal, and her coat. There was one person who might know more about Earl Maddox. the only person still around from her grandfather's generation. Thomas Kettering, her neighbor, and the man who'd sold her the shed for $1. The drive down the gravel road took her along the ridgeline, where golden aspens swayed and the mountains loomed like watchful gods. The Kettering Ranch sat at the base of a pine-covered hill, its fences in need of mending, the fields gone mostly to seed. Thomas Kettering was on his porch when she pulled up, leaning on his cane, hat-shading his eyes. "Well, if it isn't the Hemingway girl," he said, a smile ghosting across his weathered face. "Nor should I say the woman who bought my sorry old shed." Jess stepped out of the truck, Ranger bounding beside her. "You undersold it, Tom. That shed had secrets." He raised an eyebrow. "That right?" She climbed the steps, pulling the journal from her bag. "I found this under the shed. My mother's handwriting. She was hiding something about the old Hemingway mine, something my grandfather buried." Thomas's expression hardened, the easy smile vanishing. "You went down there?" Jess's stomach tightened. "You know about it." He sighed, eyes flicking toward the distant mountains. Everyone in these parts knew. The Hemingway claim was the talk of the valley back in the day. Henry struck something strange. Wasn't gold, wasn't silver. Some kind of metallic vein they couldn't identify. Shimmered like mercury, but heavier. They said it could power machinery 10 times over if you could harness it. Jess blinked. "That's impossible." He shrugged. "Maybe, but that vein, whatever it was, did something to people. Henry and his crew went too deep. Next thing we knew, there were cave-ins. Men missing. Your mother and Earl Maddox were the last ones down there with him." "Wait, Mom was down there?" Jess asked, stunned. "She was a kid." Tom nodded slowly. 16. She used to help catalog the ore samples. Smart as a whip, that girl. Henry trusted her, but after the last collapse, she came up alone. Henry and Earl never did. Jess's heart pounded. Never came back. That's what she told everyone. But a week later, she disappeared too. Moved away without a word. We figured the mine broke her spirit. He studied her face. "You said you found her writing?" Jess nodded, showing him the page from the journal, the one about sealing the entrance. "She left this for me. Said the truth needed to be told." Thomas read it silently, his weathered hands trembling. "I knew Henry was hiding something, but if Clara wanted you to find it..." He trailed off, glancing toward the pines. "Then you're not the only one looking anymore." Jess stiffened. "What do you mean?" He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a whisper. "A stranger's been snooping around my property the past few nights. Drove up in an old pickup with out-of-state plates. Said he was looking for the Hemingway boundary line. I didn't give him answers, but he had your granddad's old map in his hand." A chill crawled down Jess's spine. "Did you catch his name?" Thomas hesitated. "Said his name was Maddox." That name hit Jess like a hammer. "Earl Maddox is dead," she said automatically. "He died in that mine." Thomas's eyes narrowed. "You sure about that?" Jess's voice faltered. "No, I'm not," Ranger growled softly, as if feeling her unease. Thomas set a hand on her shoulder. "You be careful, Jess. That shed was sealed for a reason. If Earl's alive, or if someone's pretending to be him, they want whatever your family buried down there." Jess took a shaky breath. "I have to go back, Tom. There's something else down there, something my mom wanted me to find." He shook his head. "If you're going, don't go alone." "I won't," she said, glancing down at Ranger. "I've got him." Thomas managed a tired smile. "A good dog's better than a bad man any day." Back at her ranch, dusk bled slowly into night. The wind had picked up again, whispering through the pine branches outside. Jess sat by the window, the lantern on the table beside her casting long, flickering shadows. She spread out the documents from the crate once more, tracing the map of tunnels with her fingertip. Something about the markings near Vein 17 caught her eye. A symbol like a horseshoe crossed with a line. It matched the carving she'd seen on the old iron box, the one she found under the shed. She scribbled a note in her journal. Horseshoe symbol a location marker? Or ownership sign? Ranger suddenly barked, jerking her attention toward the window. Headlights. A vehicle was crawling up her long dirt driveway, its beams cutting through the dark. Jess's heart skipped. No one visited at this hour. She grabbed the lantern, moving quietly to the window. A truck idled at the gate. The driver's silhouette was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a wide-brimmed hat. The same outline Thomas had described. Jess whispered, "Maddox." Ranger growled low. The truck didn't approach further. Instead, the driver got out, walked to her mailbox and slipped something inside before turning back toward the road. Jess waited until the tail lights vanished into the trees before she dared move. She slipped on her boots, lantern in hand, and jogged to the gate with Ranger close behind. Inside the mailbox was an envelope, old and weathered. On the front, written in dark ink, were 2 words, "For Clara's daughter." Jess's pulse thundered. She tore it open. Inside was a single photograph, grainy and torn at the edges. It showed her mother, standing beside 2 men in front of the mine entrance. One was her grandfather. The other, his face half-shadowed, looked eerily familiar. On the back of the photo, in the same slanted handwriting as the mining log, was a message, "The mountain still remembers. Meet me where it began." Jess stood frozen in the cold night air, the letter trembling in her hand. Ranger whined softly, pressing against her leg. She looked up toward the dark line of pines, where the shed stood beyond the pasture. A chill ran through her bones. Earl Maddox, dead or not, wanted her to follow. And whatever waited, where it began, might just be the truth her mother had died to protect. The morning light was thin and cold when Jess Hemingway woke. Her dreams had been restless, flashes of tunnels, blue lights, and her mother's voice whispering, "The mountain takes what it's owed." The envelope from last night sat on her bedside table. She stared at the photo again, her mother, her grandfather, and Earl Maddox, before everything went wrong. The mountain still remembers. Meet me where it began. Her heart wouldn't stop pounding. Earl Maddox was supposed to be dead. If he wasn't, then maybe her mother hadn't lied. Maybe she'd been trying to stop him. Jess looked down at Ranger, already awake, tail thumping softly against the floorboards. "You ready to meet a ghost, buddy?" He tilted his head as if to say, "You first." The place where it began could only mean one thing, the old Hemingway mining entrance up on the North Ridge, nearly 3 miles from her ranch. Her grandfather had sealed it decades ago after the cave-ins. Locals called it Dead Horse Hollow, claiming you could hear the mountain groan when the wind blew through the rocks. By late morning, Jess had packed her bag, flashlight, rope, first aid kit, the journal, and the photo, and began the hike up the ridge with Ranger trotting close. The air was sharp, scented with pine and damp soil. The trail twisted through dense forest, sunlight flickering through the branches. Every sound felt amplified, the crunch of her boots, the distant cry of a hawk, the steady pant of Ranger beside her. Halfway up, she found something strange, a new tire track, fresh and deep, cutting across the old path. Someone had been here recently, and the mud still hadn't dried. She crouched, running her hand along the print. "So he's real," she murmured. "And he's ahead of us." Ranger barked once, then froze, ears twitching toward the ridge above. Jess followed his gaze. For a split second, she thought she saw a shape move between the trees, tall, solid, wearing a dark jacket. But when she blinked, it was gone. She stood, heart thudding. "Keep close, Ranger." By the time they reached the top, clouds were gathering again. The mine entrance lay in a rocky hollow between 2 ridges, a black wound in the side of the mountain, half covered by old boards and rusted signs. "Danger, unstable, do not enter." Jess crouched beside the boards. Someone had pried a few loose. The edges were splintered fresh. Ranger growled low, hackles rising. "Yeah," Jess whispered. "He's definitely here." She unhooked the lantern from her pack and pushed inside. The tunnel air was cold and damp, thick with the smell of minerals and earth. Water dripped rhythmically from the ceiling. Jess's flashlight swept across walls, streaked with silver veins that glittered faintly even in the dim light. She followed the tunnel deeper, every footstep echoing off stone. Ranger stayed close, his body tense but steady. After about 50 yards, the tunnel widened into a large chamber supported by rotting beams, and in the middle of it, crouched beside an open crate, was a man. He was older, late 60s maybe, but still broad-shouldered, his flannel shirt streaked with dust and sweat. His grey hair hung to his collar, and when he looked up, his eyes gleamed sharp and intelligent beneath heavy brows. "Didn't think you'd come," he said quietly. His voice was gravelly, low, almost tired. "Clara's girl, right?" Jess tightened her grip on the flashlight. "Earl Maddox," he smiled faintly. "So the name still means something." "You're supposed to be dead," Jess said. "Everyone thought you died in the collapse." "I nearly did." He pushed to his feet slowly. "But the mountain doesn't let go easy. Not when it's got something to show you," Ranger growled, stepping between them. Earl raised his hands. "Easy there. I'm not here to hurt you. I just want to finish what Clara started," Jess frowned. "She tried to seal this place, not open it." His expression darkened. "She thought she was saving you. But she was wrong." He gestured toward the far side of the chamber. Jess followed his gaze. A large stone slab stood there, carved with markings she didn't recognize. Spirals, triangles, the same horse and mountain emblem from the box and documents. Earl walked over and rested his palm against it. "Your grandfather and I found this 60 years ago. It wasn't natural. This carving was already here. The rock glows when you strike it with light, like it's alive." He picked up a mining lamp from the ground and shone it at the slab. Jess gasped as the carvings pulsed faintly, threads of blue light tracing through the lines like veins. "What is that?" she whispered. Earl's face was filled with awe. "We thought it was a new kind of mineral. Something powerful, energy trapped in stone. We took samples. Your grandfather got scared after the first accident. Said we'd disturbed something that wasn't meant to be touched. Because men died," Jess said sharply. Earl turned toward her. "Men die for oil, for gold, for faith. But this was life itself. Your mother knew it too. She wanted to understand it." Jess shook her head. "No, she wanted it buried." He stepped closer, his gaze piercing. "You really think Clara sealed it out of fear?" "No, she sealed it to keep the government and corporations away. She knew they'd strip this mountain bare to harness what's inside." He picked up a small metal device, something that looked like a scanner, and pointed it toward the stone. It beeped softly. "See? The energy's still flowing. The whole mountain's a reservoir." Jess's throat went dry. "You're saying my family found some kind of energy source?" "I'm saying your mother died protecting it," Earl said quietly. "And I've spent 30 years making sure no one else found it. But now," he looked toward the tunnel entrance, "others know. They've been following you, Jess." Her stomach dropped. "What do you mean, others?" Earl's jaw tightened. "Old investors. The ones who funded our dig in the 60s. They've waited decades to reclaim their property. The minute you started poking around, they knew the Hemingway claim was active again." Jess stepped back, her mind spinning. "You left me that photo," he nodded. "I needed you to see for yourself. I can't protect it alone anymore." Ranger barked sharply, interrupting them. His body went rigid, eyes fixed on the tunnel behind them. Footsteps slow, crunching gravel. Getting closer, Earl's face turned pale. "Damn it, they found us!" He grabbed Jess's arm, pulling her toward a side passage. "This way, move!" They ducked behind a fallen beam as flashlight beams cut through the chamber. Two figures in dark jackets, moving cautiously, rifles slung over their shoulders. One of them called out, "Maddox! We know you're here. You can't hide the samples forever." Jess's breath caught. "Samples." Ranger growled, low and dangerous. Earl leaned close, whispering, "They'll take whatever they can find and destroy the rest. They don't care what it does to the land, or to you." Jess stared at him, heart racing. "Then we can't let them take it," he nodded grimly. "Good, because the only way to stop them," he glanced at the glowing slab, "is to bury the truth again, for good this time." The gunman moved closer, flashlights sweeping the chamber. Jess and Earl crept toward the far wall, where a set of old detonator boxes lay half buried in the dirt. Earl crouched and began connecting wires with shaking hands. "These explosives are ancient," he muttered. "Might not even work." Jess knelt beside him. "You're going to cave it in?" He met her eyes. "It's the only way. The mountain can't fall into their hands." One of the men shouted, "Stop right there!" Gunfire echoed, sharp, deafening. Jess ducked behind a boulder, heart hammering. Earl grabbed the detonator. "Ranger, come!" Jess called, and the dog bolted to her side. Earl took a breath, fingers hovering over the trigger. "Tell Clara I kept my promise," he said softly. Before Jess could respond, he slammed the plunger down. The explosion was instant. The ground buckled, the ceiling groaned, and a roar like thunder swallowed everything. Jess felt herself thrown backward, the lantern shattering beside her. Rocks crashed, dust choked the air. Through the chaos she heard Earl shout one final time, "Run!" When Jess opened her eyes, she was half buried in rubble, her lungs burning. The tunnel behind her was gone, completely collapsed. The glowing stone was gone too. "Earl," she cried, coughing. "Earl!" No answer. Just the settling of dust and Ranger's frantic whines beside her. She pulled herself free and crawled toward the faint light from the entrance. When she finally stumbled outside, the fresh mountain air hit her like a wave. She collapsed onto the grass, trembling. Ranger nudged her shoulder, whining softly. Jess looked back at the ridge. Smoke and dust rose from the sealed entrance, curling into the grey sky. Earl Maddox was gone. And so, once again, the mountain had taken what it was owed. The explosion still echoed in Jess Hemingway's mind long after she made it back to her ranch. Every night she dreamed of the mountain cracking open and glowing veins of blue light running like fire through its heart. Every morning she woke with dirt under her nails, convinced she'd only imagined it, until she saw Ranger pacing by the shed again, whining at the ground. 3 days had passed since the mine collapse. Earl Maddox's body hadn't been found. The sheriff's office wrote it off as a landslide accident and advised Jess to stay off unstable property. But Jess knew better. Earl hadn't just died, he'd sealed something. And whatever he'd sealed was still pulsing beneath her land. It started small, a faint vibration under her boots when she walked the pasture, a hum in the fence posts at night. Then one morning she found the water troughs trembling, ripples moving in perfect circles, even though the air was still. Ranger wouldn't go near the shed anymore. He'd stand a few yards away, tail low, growling softly at the earth. Jess crouched beside him. "It's okay, boy. He's gone. It's just the mountain settling." But when she pressed her hand to the soil, she could feel it, warm, alive. She spent the next few hours hauling gear into her workshop, setting up sensors and cameras from her late father's old field kits. He'd used them for soil readings and seismic studies back when the ranch still had funding from the forestry department. The monitor blinked to life, showing irregular tremors under the ground, not deep quakes, but rhythmic pulses, almost like a heartbeat. Jess swallowed. "Earl, what did you leave me with?" By sunset, a black SUV rolled up her driveway. The tires crunched over gravel, the sound far too deliberate for a casual visit. Jess's chest tightened. 2 men stepped out. Clean suits, dustless boots, no badges. "Miss Hemingway," one said, voice crisp like he'd practiced it in front of a mirror. "I'm Agent Quinn. This is Agent Rowe. We're here about the incident in Dead Horse Hollow." Jess leaned on the porch rail, keeping her face calm. "The sheriff already came by." "Of course," Quinn said smoothly. "But this is a federal matter now. There are concerns about old mining explosives, possible contaminants, unstable minerals." Jess folded her arms. "Unstable minerals don't shoot at people." Rose's jaw tightened. "We just need to ask you a few questions." "I've already told the story twice," Jess said. "The ground gave way, I got out. Maddox didn't." Quinn's eyes flicked to the shed in the distance. "And that's all that happened?" "Pretty much," Ranger growled from behind her, fur bristling. Jess reached down, steadying him. Quinn smiled faintly. "Fine, just be careful, Miss Hemingway. There are things under this land that can change lives." He let the words hang in the air before turning back to the car. Jess watched them drive off, heart hammering. When the taillights vanished down the road, she whispered, "They know." That night, Jess returned to the shed. The moon was high, silver light spilling across the cracked boards. Inside, the air felt charged, static crawling along her skin. She spread Earl's old journal across the workbench and flipped to the last pages. The handwriting was frantic, uneven. "The energy is not from the earth, it feeds the earth." It resonates with biological matter. Heartbeats, pulse rhythms, breath. If it ever wakes completely, the land itself could bloom or burn. Jess sat back, cold dread sliding through her. "Feeds the earth," she repeated. Then she remembered the crops, how for the first time in years her corn had grown tall and green again after the explosion. The soil she'd thought barren was suddenly thriving. Even the dying trees near the ridge were budding new leaves. Ranger poured at the floor and let out a soft whine. Jess frowned, then froze. A soft glow was coming from beneath the boards. She knelt, pried up one of the planks, and gasped. The dirt beneath shimmered faintly blue, like light trapped under water. The same glow she'd seen in the mine. Jess scrambled back, heart pounding. "No, no, no, no. You're not supposed to be here." But the light pulsed again, slow and steady, in rhythm with her heartbeat. And then something else. A whisper faint as wind through pine needles, brushing her ear. "Jess!" She jolted upright, nearly dropping the flashlight. "Who's there?" Nothing. Only Ranger, whining softly, pressing against her leg. But she knew that voice. She'd heard it in dreams, in the rustle of old photographs. It was her mother's voice. That night, Jess couldn't sleep. She sat on the porch, watching the stars, the journal open on her lap. Ranger lay beside her, twitching in uneasy dreams. Every so often she glanced at the shed. The faint blue light still leaked through the cracks, like the ground itself was breathing. At around 2 a.m., she dozed off. When she opened her eyes, she was standing in the mine again. Only it wasn't collapsed. It was whole, glowing from within. The stone slab pulsed, the carvings alive with light, and standing before it, her mother. Clara Hemingway looked exactly as Jess remembered. Tall, strong, hair braided back, eyes fierce and soft all at once. Jess's throat tightened. "Mom?" Her mother smiled faintly. "You found it. What is it?" Jess asked, stepping closer. "Earl said it's energy, something buried in the mountain." Clara shook her head. "Not buried, born. The mountain is a living vessel. It holds what the world has forgotten." Jess felt her chest ache. "Then why did you try to seal it?" Clara reached out, touching her daughter's cheek. "Because people would destroy it. They already tried. The energy is tied to life itself. If harnessed wrongly, it can twist everything. You must protect it, Jess." Jess shook her head. "I don't understand how." Her mother's expression turned sorrowful. "You will. The land will show you. Listen to it." The light around her brightened, the air humming with power. "And Jess, remember, when the mountain calls again, don't run." Jess reached out. "Wait, don't go." But the light swallowed her whole. She woke on the porch at dawn, heart racing, the journal still open in her lap. Ranger barked once, sharp and urgent. Jess followed his gaze and froze. The ridge was glowing. A faint blue shimmer spread across the mountain like veins of light beneath the surface, pulsing rhythmically. The birds had gone silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Jess whispered, "Oh my God." The hum deepened, like thunder trapped underground. She could feel it in her bones, in the air, in the soil under her boots. Ranger barked again, tail stiff, staring toward the shed. And then the earth trembled, softly at first, then stronger. A crack split across the pasture, running straight toward the shed. Jess stumbled back as the glow beneath the boards flared brighter, almost blinding. From deep below, something moved, not mechanical, not human, something alive. The light dimmed, then pulsed one last time and vanished. The ground went still. The air returned to silence. Jess stood frozen, her breath ragged, heart hammering. Ranger pressed against her leg, trembling. When she finally dared to step forward, she saw it, the shed door hanging open. The blue glow gone, but a single object sitting in the dirt where it had been, a smooth black stone, warm to the touch. And engraved with her family's emblem, the horse and the mountain. Jess picked it up carefully, whispering, "You're not done, are you?" The stone pulsed once, faintly, like a heartbeat. The morning after the ground split open, the mountain was quiet. Too quiet. No birdsong, no rustling leaves, only the faint hum Jess Hemingway could now feel in her bones. The black stone she'd found in the shed still sat on her kitchen table, faintly pulsing with light every few seconds. When she tried to move it to the barn, her dog, Ranger, growled until she put it back. Jess sipped her coffee, eyes locked on the stone. "You're alive, aren't you?" she murmured. Ranger gave a low whine, then pawed at the floorboards. The ground trembled just slightly, like the ranch itself was breathing. By midday, Jess realized something else was happening, where the crack had split across her field. Green sprouts had begun to push through the dry earth, thick, healthy shoots that hadn't been there yesterday. The soil around them shimmered faintly with that same blue luminescence. She crouched and brushed the soil with her fingers. It was damp and warm, even though it hadn't rained in weeks. "Impossible," she whispered. By late afternoon, entire rows of grass and wildflowers had erupted in bloom. The air smelled rich and sweet, like spring in full force. Bees buzzed where there had been none all year. Jess felt the hum again, stronger now, thrumming through her chest. It felt alive and oddly protective. She opened Earl's journal again. One line stood out: "When the pulse finds a vessel it chooses, it binds. The land becomes the keeper, and so does the blood that tends it." Her breath caught. The blood that tends it? It was her family. The Hemingways had lived on this land for generations. Whatever the mountain's secret was, it had chosen them, but she didn't feel chosen. She felt hunted. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridge, headlights flashed on the road again. Jess tensed, watching from her porch as a white truck rolled to a stop near the fence line. This time it wasn't men in suits. It was Sheriff Daniels, a weathered man who'd known Jess since childhood. He stepped out, hat in hand. "Evening, Jess." "Sheriff," she said, forcing calm. "You hear about the landslide again?" He sighed, glancing toward the ridge. "Not exactly. Couple fellas came by the station this morning, claimed to be from the Department of Energy. Said you were storing hazardous material out here?" Her pulse spiked. "That's ridiculous." He nodded slowly. "That's what I told them. But they weren't the kind you argue with. They showed me federal papers, stamped and everything. Asked for coordinates to your ranch." Jess's stomach twisted. "Did you give it to them?" He hesitated. "They already had it, Jess. They're coming back tonight. You need to be careful." Ranger growled again, pacing the porch. Daniels frowned. "You all right?" "You look pale." "I'm fine," she said quickly. "Thanks for the warning." He tipped his hat. "You take care now, and Jess, stay inside after dark." As his truck disappeared down the road, Jess felt a chill crawl up her spine. The last time she'd heard those words was from her mother, the night before the old mine collapsed. The knock came just after midnight. 3 sharp raps, metal on wood. Not polite, not patient. Ranger barked furiously, teeth bared. Jess grabbed her flashlight and stepped to the door. Peeking through the crack, 2 men stood on her porch, Quinn and Rowe. Their faces were unreadable under the porch light. "Miss Hemingway," Quinn called, voice smooth but cold. "We're here under federal authority. We need access to your property for containment and extraction." Jess gripped the door frame. "Extraction of what?" "Geothermal matter of interest," Quinn said. "You're sitting on a volatile deposit. We can't risk a rupture." She laughed once, sharp. "Volatile? You mean valuable?" He didn't blink. "Either way, it doesn't belong to you." Ranger lunged, barking, and Jess slammed the door shut. "You're not stepping 1 foot on this ranch without a warrant." Rowe's voice came through the wood, colder than Quinn's. "You won't need a warrant when the ground swallows you whole." Then silence. A moment later, Jess heard the crunch of boots retreating down the path, but she didn't relax, because beneath the sound of her racing heart, she could hear something else. Machines, engines idling in the distance. They weren't leaving. They were setting up. Jess ran to the shed, flashlight slicing through the dark. The black stone on her table pulsed brighter now, steady as a drumbeat. The hum beneath the earth grew deeper, more insistent. "Please," she whispered, resting her hand on the stone. "Don't do this." The glow flared, blinding for a moment, and a wave of heat rolled through the air. The ground outside shook hard enough to rattle the windows. Ranger barked, his fur standing on end. Jess stumbled out the door just in time to see it, the crack in the earth widening. Blue light poured upward in ribbons, twisting through the air like liquid fire. From the distant road, headlights flashed and engines roared. She could see the silhouettes of trucks and figures moving toward the ranch, but the light from the mountain spread faster, rippling through the soil, racing down the slope. Where it touched the ground, grass and trees burst into bloom. The air smelled like rain and wildflowers and ozone. Jess fell to her knees, covering her ears as a deep sound rolled across the land, a pulse louder than thunder, resonating through everything alive. The figures near the truck stopped, shouting. Some dropped their equipment. Then one by one, the vehicles died, engines sputtering, lights flickering out. The pulse continued, steady, alive. Ranger pressed against Jess, trembling but unafraid. The glow surrounded them both, warm and strange and powerful. For a second, she swore she could hear her mother's voice again. "It's not destruction, Jess, it's awakening." And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the light dimmed. The hum faded into silence. The night returned. Jess stood slowly, her skin tingling, her breath shaky. In the distance, the men shouted orders, but their machines wouldn't start. Whatever had awakened under her ranch had just protected her. When the sun rose the next morning, the valley looked transformed. The once dry creek was flowing again, clear and cold. The hills were covered in new green shoots. Even the air felt cleaner, sweeter, but the stone was gone. Jess searched the shed, the field, the crack in the earth. Nothing. Only one thing remained where she'd left it. A small patch of blue moss shaped like a spiral, the same spiral carved into the mine wall. Ranger sniffed it once, then wagged his tail. Jess stared at it, her mind spinning. The stone had vanished, but the pulse, the life was still here, seeping into everything. She walked to the ridge and looked down at the valley below, where federal trucks sat abandoned. The men had left during the night. She could see their tire tracks in the mud, headed away from the mountain. She took a deep breath, feeling the hum settle deep inside her chest. "This is my home," she whispered. "And you're part of it now." The wind rose softly, carrying her words back toward the ridge. And for the briefest moment, Jess swore she saw a shimmer of blue light ripple across the horizon, like the mountain answering her back. The morning sun rose soft and gold over the ridge, but Jess Hemingway felt no peace in it. The valley shimmered with new life, streams where there had been dust, grass where there had been rock. But beneath the beauty, something stirred. The air still carried that hum, deep and low, like the mountain was whispering through the soil. Jess could feel it when she walked, an almost magnetic pull in her chest. Ranger felt it too. He stayed close, alert, tail low but eyes bright. The energy wasn't fading. It was spreading. Jess began tracking the changes methodically, like her father had taught her. She collected soil samples, water samples, even seeds from the new growth. The readings made no sense. Radiation at 0, yet energy levels off the charts. At noon, she noticed something else. Her hand was glowing faintly where she touched the soil. The light wasn't bright, just a soft pulse under her skin, fading when she moved away from the ridge. She sat on the porch, rubbing her fingers, whispering, "What are you doing to me?" When she opened Earl Maddox's journal again, she found a note she hadn't seen before, scribbled in the margin, half faded. "The energy marks its keeper through contact. The living and the land become one circuit. The more it thrives, the more she will feel it." Jess's stomach turned. He'd known this would happen to her, or someone like her. The hum deepened in her chest, like it was answering her fear. That afternoon, a knock sounded on the porch again, but this time it was soft, familiar. When Jess opened the door, she froze. It was Margaret Dunn, her mother's old friend, the historian from the county museum. Her silver hair was tucked neatly under a hat, and her eyes, sharp as ever, searched Jess's face. "I heard what happened on the ridge," Margaret said. "I told myself it couldn't be true. But when the power went out all over town last night, I knew." Jess blinked. "The town lost power. All of it. For 2 minutes, every light from here to Silver Creek went dark. Then the old well by the chapel started flowing again, after 30 years dry." Margaret stepped closer. The mountain woke up, didn't it? Jess exhaled shakily. You sound like Earl. Margaret smiled sadly. He wasn't wrong about everything. Your grandfather told me once that the Hemingway bloodline was a covenant, the keepers of the mountain. Most people thought it was folklore. Maybe it wasn't. Jess gestured toward the ridge. It's alive, Margaret. It's changing everything, the soil, the air. I can feel it in me. Margaret studied her hand, where the faint glow still flickered. It chose you, Jess's voice cracked. I didn't ask for this. Margaret's eyes softened. None of your family did. The land doesn't ask. It remembers. As dusk fell, Jess and Margaret sat by the fire, the journal open between them. They talked about Clara Hemingway, Jess's mother, and how she'd spent years researching the ancient markings under the mountain. According to her notes, they predated recorded mining in the area by centuries. Margaret traced the spiral on one of the pages. Your mother believed this was an old indigenous symbol, a guardian sign, meant to warn people, not invite them. Jess frowned. Then why did she keep studying it? Margaret looked up, her eyes reflecting the firelight. Because she knew it was connected to your family somehow. The Hemingways weren't just settlers, they were chosen custodians. That's what the old legend said. Before Jess could respond, Ranger growled, a low, dangerous rumble. His ears pricked toward the tree line. Jess stood slowly. Someone's out there. A light flickered between the trees, small, moving steadily closer. Then a voice, faint but familiar. Jess Hemingway. Jess's pulse jumped. It wasn't Quinn or Rowe, it was Sheriff Daniels. She stepped off the porch. Over here! The sheriff stumbled out of the woods, covered in mud, breathing hard. Jess, they're coming back, he panted. Not just those two. Whole convoy this time. Black vans, heavy gear. I think they've got orders to seize the land. Jess's chest went cold. When? By morning, Margaret rose to her feet. They won't wait that long if they smell what's under this ground. Jess turned toward the ridge, where faint blue light shimmered beneath the soil. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind. When the mountain calls again, don't run. She clenched her fists. Then we won't. The night deepened fast. Jess and Margaret worked quickly, packing supplies, sealing the barn, pulling Earl's old blueprints from storage. Sheriff Daniels stayed by the porch, scanning the dark horizon with his rifle, though he knew bullets wouldn't stop what was coming. By midnight they heard it, the low rumble of engines far down the road. Then faint voices through the wind. Jess stood at the edge of her field, hair whipping in the cold night air, watching headlights snake up the mountain pass. She wasn't afraid anymore. Not exactly. Something inside her, something ancient, had settled. The hum beneath the ground grew stronger, synchronizing with her heartbeat. The grass glowed faintly under her feet, and Ranger stood beside her, tail low but steady. Margaret approached quietly. If your mother could see you now, she'd tell you the same thing she told me the night before she vanished. Jess looked over. What's that? Margaret's eyes glimmered. Don't let them take the mountain's heart. The first drone appeared at 2 a.m., a small black silhouette slicing through the dark. Jess heard it before she saw it, a mechanical buzz that didn't belong in the silence of the valley. Then came the vans. 3, then 5. Engines idling as armed men poured out, fanning across her pasture. Floodlights flickered on, blinding bright. Miss Hemingway. A voice boomed through a megaphone. This property is under federal investigation. Stand down. Jess stepped forward, her boots sinking into the damp soil. She held Earl's journal in one hand, her other resting on the ground. You don't belong here. The man didn't hear her or didn't care. You are in possession of restricted geothermal material. Failure to comply will result in the ground shook, lights flickered, engines sputtered. Jess closed her eyes, letting the hum rise through her chest. She wasn't doing it consciously. It was like the land itself was listening. A flash of blue raced through the earth, splitting into veins of light that circled her like a living shield. The men staggered, shouting. One of the floodlights exploded, showering sparks. Jess opened her eyes. They glowed faintly blue. You shouldn't have come here, she said quietly. The pulse rose again, stronger than ever. The soil vibrated beneath everyone's feet. A deep crack tore through the field, sending dust and light swirling upward. Trees bent toward the mountain like bowing in reverence. From the ridge, a low sound rolled out, part wind, part growl, part song. It wasn't destructive, it was a warning. The agents stumbled back, radios shrieking with static. Gwyn shouted orders, but his words were swallowed by the hum. One by one, their vehicles went dark. Jess felt power surge through her veins. She raised her hand, and the glow beneath the ground pulsed brighter in answer. The mountain had awakened fully now, and she was its voice. Ranger barked once, as if echoing her command. And then, with a deep roar that shook the night sky, the ridge split open, light spilling like water. Flooding the valley with radiance, the men ran. Jess stood firm. Margaret whispered behind her, awestruck. Clara was right. You are the keeper. When the light finally dimmed, the valley was silent again. The agents were gone, the vans abandoned, and Jess stood alone in the new stillness, the earth warm beneath her bare feet, the pulse steady in her blood. She looked toward the horizon and whispered, "It's not over, is it?" The mountain's hum answered softly, like a heartbeat through stone. "No, it's only beginning." The morning after the quake, the world felt still, too still. The valley was bright, fresh, and clean, as though the storm had scrubbed it raw. But Jess Hemingway could feel the mountain breathing. It wasn't the kind of quiet that came after a battle. It was the quiet that came before something even bigger. Ranger padded beside her through the wet grass. His fur shimmered faintly in the sunlight, a soft blue sheen that hadn't been there before. Jess crouched and touched his head. "You feel it too, huh, boy?" He whined low and nosed her hand toward the ridge. The split in the earth that had opened the night before still glowed faintly. Smoke or mist drifted from it, white, cool, and strangely fragrant. When she leaned closer, the hum in her chest deepened, and a whisper, almost like her mother's voice, brushed her ear. "Follow the light." "Jess, it's waiting for you." Margaret arrived mid-morning, wrapped in Earl's old wool coat. "You didn't sleep," she said softly, seeing the circles under Jess's eyes. Jess didn't answer. She was staring at the ridge, shovel in hand, the same look she'd had when she first found the old shed. "I think it wants me to go down there," Jess said quietly. "To see what's under all this?" Margaret hesitated. "Are you sure that's wise?" "After what happened last night." "Margaret, the men will come back," Jess cut in. "You and I both know that. If I don't understand what this is, I'll lose everything." Again, the older woman studied her, then nodded once. "Then I'm going with you." They packed lights, rope, and a coil of wire from the generator shed. Ranger followed close, whining softly. Jess brushed the hair from her face, the faint glow in her hand steady now. Like a compass, she stepped toward the fissure, took a breath, and climbed in. The tunnel sloped down steeply, carved not by man, but by something else. Smooth walls of glassy black rock streaked with veins of blue light. It wasn't hot like magma. It was alive. The air pulsed faintly with energy, matching Jess's heartbeat. "Dear God," Margaret whispered, touching the wall. "This isn't natural," Jess nodded. "No, but I don't think it's unnatural either." They descended for what felt like miles. The hum grew stronger, resonating through their bones. Jess's flashlight flickered, but the light from the walls was enough to see by. Finally, the tunnel widened into a massive cavern, so vast that their voices vanished into its hollow. In the center stood a formation unlike anything Jess had ever seen, a crystal spire rising 20 feet tall, glowing from within. It pulsed rhythmically, like a slow, steady heart. "The mountain's heart," Jess whispered. Margaret swallowed. "Or its brain." Jess approached the spire slowly, her hand trembling. As she neared, faint shapes appeared within the crystal, images like frozen memories. Her mother's face, the old shed, even Earl Maddox with his pickaxe. The scenes flickered like dreams trapped in glass. "Jess," Margaret said urgently, "I think it's recording. Everything that's ever happened here." Jess pressed her palm against the surface. The hum rose sharply, and a rush of warmth surged through her arm. In an instant, her mind flooded with visions, thousands of years in a heartbeat. She saw the mountain when it was young and green, long before settlers came. She saw ancient tribes kneeling at its base, offering songs, not stones. She saw men digging deep for gold and the earth bleeding light. She saw her mother, Clara Hemingway, descending the same tunnel, touching the same crystal, whispering the same words, "I will protect you." Jess gasped and stumbled back. Clutching her chest, Margaret caught her. "What did you see?" Jess's voice shook. "It's not a mine. It's not treasure. It's a living core. The mountain itself, it's alive. My family's been guarding it for generations, keeping it from being destroyed." She turned toward the walls, now pulsing faster. "And I think it's dying." The hum deepened, vibrating through the floor. A low, resonant tone echoed through the cavern, and dust rained from the ceiling. Margaret stumbled. "Jess!" "What's happening?" Jess's eyes glowed faintly blue. She could hear words again. Soft, layered voices, ancient and sorrowful. They have woken what was sleeping. "The balance breaks. The keeper must choose. Choose what?" Jess shouted into the echo, "To save the mountain or the world above it." Her breath caught. The vision sharpened. She saw the town above, the streams, the homes, her ranch. And she saw them burning, swallowed by light, as the energy below surged uncontrolled. The heart wasn't just life, it was power. Enough to reshape everything if it burst free. Margaret gripped her arm. "Jess, if it breaks loose, it'll destroy the valley." Jess stared at the spire. "And if I seal it again, I might die with it." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "Then let me do it. I've lived my life. Yours is still ahead." Jess shook her head. "It has to be me. The Keeper's bloodline. It responds to me, not anyone else." The hum seemed to answer, gentle now, like a heartbeat slowing. Ranger barked once, sharp and steady. Jess smiled weakly. "Guess that settles it." She knelt before the crystal and placed both hands on its surface. The glow spread instantly, wrapping around her arms and chest, lifting her slightly from the ground. Energy surged through her veins, cold and warm, light and dark, all at once. She could see everything now. Every root, every stream, every living thing connected to the mountain. Her voice came out calm and clear. "If you need my strength to survive, take it. But spare the land. Spare the people." Margaret called her name, but the sound was lost in the light. Jess's body became translucent, threads of blue energy winding through her like rivers. The spire pulsed brighter, once, twice, and then the entire cavern filled with light so blinding that Margaret fell to her knees. Ranger howled, and then silence. When Margaret opened her eyes again, the cavern was still. The spire no longer glowed, only shimmered faintly like an ember. Jess lay beside it, unconscious but breathing. "Jess!" Margaret rushed to her side, feeling for a pulse. It was strong, steady, but her skin was warm as sunlight. When Margaret helped her sit up, Jess's eyes flickered open. They weren't blue anymore. They were clear as glass, reflecting the mountain light. Jess smiled faintly. "It's done. It's calm now." The spire pulsed once in agreement, then went dark, the hum fading into silence. Margaret exhaled shakily. "You saved it," Jess shook her head softly. "No, we saved each other." By the time they climbed back up, dawn was breaking. The ridge shimmered faintly in the early light, covered in new grass. The air smelled clean and sweet, like spring after a long winter. The crack had sealed. The earth looked untouched. Ranger bounded ahead, barking joyfully. Jess smiled and knelt, running her hand over the fresh soil. The faint glow in her skin was gone, but she could still feel the heartbeat beneath the ground. Quiet. Peaceful. Margaret touched her shoulder. "The mountain will live," Jess nodded. "And I'll keep watch." As they stood there in the sunrise, the valley stretched before them, bright and alive. The men who had come to take it were gone. The old fears had vanished with the storm, but Jess knew it wasn't an ending. It was an understanding. The land wasn't hers to own. It was hers to protect, and somewhere deep below, the mountain whispered back, "Keeper of light. Your watch begins." The week after the mountain awoke, the valley changed in ways no one could quite explain. The streams ran clearer. The soil grew richer, and the once barren patches of earth sprouted wildflowers overnight. But the biggest change was in Jess Hemingway herself. She moved differently now. Calm, grounded, as if the pulse of the mountain guided her every breath. The faint glow in her hands was gone, but the connection remained. She could still feel the rhythm beneath her feet, still hear the whisper through the wind. Ranger, always at her side, had become her shadow and sentinel both. The scar on his shoulder, where he'd brushed the glowing soil, had healed into a silvery mark that shimmered faintly when the sun rose. The ranch, once lonely and half-forgotten, had become something else entirely, a sanctuary. On the 8th morning, Margaret Dunn returned with a convoy of county trucks. But not the kind Jess feared. No agents, no armed men. These were soil scientists, water testers, and 2 officials from the State Environmental Office. They came with curiosity, not conquest. Margaret met Jess by the porch. "Word got out," she said simply. "Satellite scans picked up last week's energy spike. The whole region wants to know what happened," Jess sighed. "And what are you telling them?" Margaret's lips twitched. That the earth shifted, released pressure, and healed itself. "Nature's mystery," Jess smiled faintly. "That's one way to put it." One of the scientists approached, holding a sample vial. "Miss Hemingway," he said, "we've never seen anything like this soil. It's self-repairing, richer every day. Whatever happened here, it wasn't destruction. It was rejuvenation," Jess nodded quietly. "The mountain was sick," she said. "Now it's not," the scientist frowned. "You talk like it's alive." Jess met his gaze, steady. "Maybe it is." That night, as the others packed up their instruments and left, Jess sat alone on the porch, with the old journal in her lap. Earl Maddox's handwriting still looped strong and steady across the yellowed pages. But near the back, pressed flat between 2 pages, was something new, a folded letter she hadn't noticed before. The paper was brittle, sealed with wax. She broke it open carefully. The handwriting wasn't Earl's. It was her mother's. "My dearest Jess, if you find this, it means the mountain has called again. I knew one day it would. You were always meant to hear it clearer than anyone. Don't fear what you feel. It's the world, remembering itself through you. Protect it not as a secret, but as a promise. If I could give you anything, it would be this truth. The land heals when we listen, not when we dig. All my love." Mum Jess pressed the letter to her chest, tears streaking down her face. For years, she'd thought her mother's obsession had been madness. Now she understood. It had been devotion, a vow she'd passed on to her daughter. Ranger rested his head on her knee and sighed deeply, as if he, too, understood. Within a month, people started arriving, quietly at first. A rancher from over the ridge, whose well had gone dry. A young couple who'd lost their crops to drought. An old miner who couldn't stand the thought of what he'd taken from the earth. They came not with machines, but with questions. And Jess, unsure how to explain what she'd seen, started by listening. She showed them the new growth along the creek bed. She taught them to read the soil, the color, the scent, the pulse of life within it. She spoke of the mountain as though it were an old friend. Not a resource. Words spread faster than she liked, but she didn't turn anyone away. The Hemingway Ranch became something different, a place for those seeking to learn how to give back. They called it Heart of the Mountain Farm. One afternoon, a sudden storm rolled down from the peaks. Dark clouds, lightning splitting the sky. The valley shook, and for a moment Jess feared it was happening again, but this time she didn't feel panic. She walked barefoot into the rain, lifted her face to the wind and whispered, "I'm here." The lightning struck the ridge, hard, bright, and the earth answered with a single deep pulse. Then the clouds broke, the rain softened, the smell of petrichor filled the air. The next morning, when she and Ranger climbed the ridge to check for damage, they found something new, a single crystal seed the size of a pebble, sat half buried in the mud where the lightning had struck. It pulsed faintly, slow, alive, gentle. Jess smiled. A piece of the heart. She held it in her palm, and it dimmed, as if falling asleep. When she placed it in the soil near the creek, it began to hum softly again. Margaret, watching from the path, said quietly, "Maybe it's growing back." Jess nodded. "Or spreading hope." Years passed quietly after that. The ranch flourished, more than it ever had before. Trees reclaimed the hillsides, wildflowers spread through the meadows, and the creek sang year-round. People came from all over to learn, not to take. Jess grew into the title she'd once resisted. The locals began calling her the Keeper, half in jest, half in reverence, but she never saw herself as anything mystical. She was a woman who'd once bought a ruined shed for $1 and found inside it the reason she'd been born. One evening, as the sun slipped behind the peaks, Jess stood by the ridge with Ranger now graying around the muzzle. The mountain glowed gold in the light. "Looks like we did it," she whispered. Ranger wagged his tail weakly and leaned against her leg. From below, she could feel the pulse, gentle, content, eternal. She smiled. "You rest now. I'll keep the watch." 50 years later, long after Jess Hemingway's name had faded into legend, hikers still spoke of the ridge that hummed underfoot. They said if you stood there at dawn and listened close enough, you could hear a heartbeat beneath the earth. And sometimes, when the wind shifted, a woman's voice seemed to echo faintly through the pines. The land heals when we listen. Below, wild horses roamed the green valley freely. The soil shimmered with strange light where the morning dew gathered, and a small wooden sign still stood by the trailhead. Carved by hand long ago, Heart of the Mountain Farm, in memory of Jess Hemingway, the keeper of Light Up. Next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.